Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai, Chapter 7, Halacha 2. In Chapter 7, Halacha 1, we were talking about how you're going to do the maestro stipulation with food that you have before Shabbat so that you can go to a mitzvah meal of an Amma Aretz and have the food on Shabbos. Now, there's a lot of problems that are with that. It's complicated. It's all a case about, yes, is there brera, or no, there is no brera. In the case that we have in Halacha 1, if you are believing that there is no brera, and there's a lot of people who believe that from the Beurim and the Tanaim, including Rebbe and Rabbi Eliezer. So there's a lot of good company for saying, no, there is no brera. Brera is going to be this retroactive declaration that says after the fact, it's as if it was this thing before you started, okay? We're going to be getting into now what happens if you're going to this mitzvah meal and you're going to have the host beverages on Shabbat, and the formulation is going to be a little bit different than for food. This is going to be dealing when, they're going to be pouring you a cup of liquid and, maybe the wine or something like that, maybe something like that. So the Mishnah says in a case where the host pours their guest a cup to drink, and literally it just says they poured him a cup in the Mishnah. The Gemara is going to come to explain, says the Chazan Ish, that the Mishnah's wording is actually unclear and is actually referring to someone who expected before the Shabbos that the host would pour him a cup to drink on Shabbat. And again, as we saw in Chapter 7, Halacha 1, this situation is dealing with you had food before Shabbat. It was in your possession. And by the way, this is only working with Demai. Okay, this is not with Tevel. But in the case of Demai, you have this food that you have in front of you. You start tithing it and you say, okay, now in this location of the food that I will be getting on, say, Saturday during the day, this portion here that I'm designating is going to be the location. And all you're doing on Saturday is identifying the location. So that process was already started. That's not a retroactive designation where you're saying something like, the food that I will eat will retroactively be tithed. And I'm doing the tithe so that when it becomes to be Shabbat and I separate it, that will be where, that tithe is already done. We're not doing something like that. All we're doing is we're saying, okay, I'm starting the process now. I'm taking out the tithes now, and then the remaining portion, all I'm going to do is identify that portion on Saturday. A little bit different. We're going to be doing that with liquids here. Formulation is also going to be different. Again, we're talking about Demai liquids. So he's going to go and he's going to identify, and so it says he must say the following stipulation before Shabbat, that 1/100th that I will leave over at the bottom of the cup tomorrow is hereby designated as Meiser Rishon, and the rest is Meiser, another 9/100ths to be next to it. Now, you notice here, he's not separating out Truma Gedola here. All he's doing is separating out the Demai. And again, we're dealing with a case with Demai where it's assumed that the Amma Aretz already separated out Truma Gedola. So you see that in this formulation, the Truma Gedola is missing from this designation. Now, it's natural to leave a remnant of the drink at the bottom of the cup, and the idea is that the host is not going to realize that the guest suspects him of being lax with regards to separating out maestros. And you kind of don't want to embarrass the Amma Aretz. Now, Rabbi Kanievsky says about this that the standard stipulation described in the last Mishnah, that would be Chapter 7, Halacha 1, where it's saying that 1/100th that I will separate from my portion tomorrow is hereby designated. That's only for foods. And in this case, says Rabbi Kanievsky, it is possible to unobtrusively separate a small portion on the Shabbat before eating. But in the case of liquids, it's not possible since one cannot pour part of the drink without attracting the host's attention. And therefore, that's why a different formula is going to be necessary. So the Mishnah continues, and it says that he then says that 1/100th that I made Meiser Rishon first is hereby made into Trumas Meiser for the Meiser Rishon. So now he's taking out the Meiser Rishon, and he continues, says this Mishnah, and the Meiser Sheni for my drink is hereby designated in the mouth of the cup, in other words, on the top, and is hereby deconsecrated onto the coins I set aside for the purpose. So the idea is that, again, this is talking about a cup of something that's going to be Demai, and he's making this declaration before Shabbat, and the guest is going to be allowed to drink what he served on Shabbat as long as he's leaving over a small part at the bottom of the cup. What is that small part? That's going to be the Trumas Meiser of Demai. And what's he doing with the Meiser Sheni? He's already designating the Meiser Sheni onto these coins before Shabbat. All of this is taking place before Shabbat. So the Chazan Ish is going to say about this that having designated the Meiser Rishon at the bottom of the cup, he designates the Meiser Sheni at the top, and by the same token, he could designate the liquid in the northern side or the southern side of the cup as Meiser Sheni. We saw that in the last case in the last Mishnah. But again, you're pointing out that there's a location. Now, the Vilna Goan is saying that you're using the top of the cup because that part of the cup is clearly identified. And if you're using some other part of the cup, like the north part of the cup, that portion is not clearly identified. So some slight differences and some different motivations for why we have these differences, as Rabbi Kanievsky points out. Now, the Gemara is going to explain that the Mishnah teaches the formula to be recited before Shabbat by one who anticipates being served a drink by the Am Haaretz on Shabbat. And this is implying that we're dealing with a formula that's going to be recited on Shabbat itself. And the Mishnah is going to address this point. It says, this is what the Mishnah means to say, says this Gemara, in regard to the expected pouring of a cup to drink, where the formula described in the last Mishnah cannot be employed, a different formula is recited for Shabbat. So Pnei Moshe says that he declares that the liquid at the bottom of the cup shall be the Trumas Meiser immediately upon being poured in. That's a key point. In other words, he's already gone through the separation beforehand. And again, we're dealing with a case where this is not being done with Beur. So what's happening is all he's doing is identifying where is this? Where is this? So as soon as, and again, what's left over is the Trumas Meiser. All that's being done is as soon as this liquid is poured into the cup, that's immediately going to be the Trumas Meiser, and he's identifying that. That's the keen point by the Pnei Moshe. And the Gemara is going to continue and analyze this formula described in the Mishnah, in which you're going to designate the Meiser from which will be left over after he drinks. And the Gemara says, what is the precise formula which we are dealing with? In other words, if the Mishnah means that the guest says that his maestros designation shall already take effect before he drinks, such that when he drinks from the top of the cup on the Shabbos, there's already going to be Trumas Meiser at the bottom. And the idea is that, again, as soon as this Trumas Meiser hits the cup, that's being identified as the location. So the Gemara says then the beverage is a mixture of Chulin and Trumas Meiser, and when he drinks it from it will inevitably be some forbidden Trumas Meiser mixture. And if the Mishnah means that the guest says his maestros declaration shall take effect only when he has already drunk, such that the time he drinks from the cup, it does not contain the Trumas Meiser, then in retrospect, it emerges he drank Tevel. And that's the question, since the maestros was not yet designated when he consumed the beverage. So there's a question here. Are you having this identification when you start to drink it, or when does it get poured in? And on one hand, it might be that if you're going to start drinking it, perhaps you drank the Trumas Meiser mixture and then you really had Tevel. Or perhaps the other problem is if you're going to be identifying the Trumas Meiser as soon as you pour it into the cup, perhaps the problem is now you have a mixture of a mixture, a demua, where you're going to have a mixture of Chulin and Trumas Meiser. And then you're going to be consuming a forbidden mixture. And you're going to be having Trumas Meiser. So what's going to be the problem here? The Gemara is going to answer. It's going to say that we're dealing with a case where the guest says that the maestros designation shall take effect already when I drink. In other words, it's going to be effective immediately, and it should be identified only when he finishes drinking, meaning that the specific portion will eventually remain in the cup when I finish drinking, and that's going to be the Trumas Meiser at that moment. So how do you do it, right? If you do it where you're pouring it from the cup and you're designating it then, that becomes a problem because then you have a mixture of Chulin and Trumas Meiser. If you're going to start it and say, I'm going to do it and identify it from when it's at the top of the cup and I start to drink it, you also have a problem. So what they're trying to say is you'll only identify it when you're done drinking everything. And you're going to leave a portion at the end of the cup. And at that point, you're going to have it. And then at that point where you're leaving it over, and after you've left over this remaining portion of Trumas Meiser, you're not drinking Tevel, since the Trumas Meiser is going to be designated and you're going to drink something that's rectified from the moment of the stipulation. And therefore, you didn't designate it yet, so there's not a mixture of Trumas Meiser and Chulin. And since the portion designated as Trumas Meiser is ultimately what's going to be left at the bottom of the cup when you're finished drinking, he just drank Chulin. That's really what this is trying to say. Now, the Gemara is going to move on. It's going to say the idea is that what's coming up is since the Amma Aretz is not going to be careful in matters of Torah, then the drink that he's going to pour is always going to be assumed to be Demai. And the portion at the bottom of the cup that the guest gets and he designates is going to be Trumas Meiser that's automatically in a state of Tuma. Now we know that if cups are not handled properly, that from the interior side of the cup you can make something Demai. And also if you're handling beverages and you're not doing it right, then also from the beverage side it can be Demai. So whether it's going to be Demai from the cup or the beverage side, it's going to be considered to be Demai. And again, this can be a case where you have a haver who is careful about ties, but he's not careful about Torah. Alternatively, it could be a case where you really don't have a choice and it's a mitzvah meal, and you really have to go kind of thing. So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, but when he leaves over the Trumas Meiser at the bottom of the cup and continues to handle the cup, does it not emerge that he is handling Truma? In other words, Trumas Meiser that's Demai on the Sabbath. And since Truma that is Demai is unfit for consumption, it's deemed to be Muksa, so then how can the guest handle the cup? So what this is saying, wait a second, if you're handling Demai Truma, that's Muksa. Why? Because you can't use it on that Shabbat. Because you can't eat it, because it's Demai. So what are you dealing with here? And the Gemara is going to answer, because if you're having this mixture that is going to be Demai, the Trumas Meiser is going to be Demai, and it's going to be left at the bottom of the cup, and you're moving around the cup, then isn't that a problem? And the Gemara is going to answer. Rabbi Lazar says, the guest leaves over a minute amount of Chulin together with the Trumas Meiser at the bottom of the cup, and since the Chulin is not Muksa, the Demai Trumas Meiser may be moved together with it, in accordance with that which we learned in the Mishnah elsewhere, that we may move Truma that is Demai together with Truma that is Tahor, or together with Chulin. And so, again, this is coming right out of the oral law and the Mishnah, and that if you're leaving over some Chulin in this cup together with it, you're allowed to move Chulin together with Demai Tevel, Demai Truma. If you have a case where you only have Demai Truma, then you really do have a problem. But if you have some Chulin mixed into it, then you're moving the portion that is allowed to you on Shabbat, and that is going to supersede the Demai Truma. So the Gemara is going to reject that answer. It's going to say, but these cases here are not comparable. And there in the Mishnah, the Demai Truma is being moved for the sake of Tahor Truma or for the sake of Chulin. In other words, over there, the owner wants to move the Tahor Truma or the Chulin because he's actually going to be using it on Shabbat. And the Demai Truma really is just sort of there, and it's not significant. So that's why you can move it with it. But over here, the Mishnah's case is that the chulin, says this Gemara, is being moved for the sake of Demai Trumas Meiser. And the main thing left at the bottom of the cup is the Demai Trumas Meiser. So how could it be then, because, your main portion is that, the chulin is going to be subsidiary to the Demai Trumas Meiser. And in the other case of the Mishnah is going to be where, no, the chulin that you're going to use on Shabbat is going to be primary, and the Demai Truma is going to be subordinate. Over here, it's the opposite case. So how can it be? And the Gemara is going to answer. It's going to say, Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Bun, says, it is only when the liquid leaves the cup that it becomes consecrated as Trumas Meiser. So in the Mishnah's case, the guest stipulates that the retroactive Meiser declaration takes place only after the cup is emptied of the leftover liquid. And until then, the liquid is not yet established as Trumas Meiser, and therefore it's not Muksa. In other words, what he's saying is, when you're making this pre-Shabbos designation, the person does not stipulate that the Maestros shall take effect already now, and that when he drinks, in other words, he's saying that it's going to be as soon as he finishes drinking. And rather, he's really going to be stipulating that it takes effect when the cup is empty. In other words, when it's put down, or when he spills the remnants of the cup, that these cups that are poured out, that remnant is going to be identified as Trumas Meiser of the drink. But until then, it's not muksa, and the person is allowed to handle the cup. But he is permitted to drink the cup initially. Why? Because again, inside of there you have a mixture. You didn't designate the Meiser Rishon yet, and the Trumas Meiser yet, and only after you're doing it are the process, is it going to be identified, and then it's going to become Trumas Meiser retroactively. And the Rosh is kind of puzzled by this question and this answer. So it says, since we say that the designation is retroactively effective, which is why the person is allowed to drink the liquid in the first place, it also emerges retroactively that whatever is ultimately left over in the cup was Trumas Meiser all along. And although the retroactive clarification is not triggered until he spills it out, once that clarification occurs, it emerges that when the only thing left in the cup was the remnant, the person handled muksa. So what is to be gained with this retroactive clarification taking place? Only when he spills it out. And there's another explanation from it by Rabbi Akiva Eger on approach, and he's saying that it is only when his mouth departs from the cup that the Trumas Meiser becomes consecrated. And this designation takes effect the moment after the person finishes drinking, but by that time he has removed his mouth from the cup, and at that point forward he is in fact prohibited to handle the cup, since then the contents would be muksa. So he must immediately put it down, refrain from handling it again. And Rabbi Akiva Eger is pointing out that, in short, this Gemara concedes that the muksa restriction prevents the person from handling the cup after he's finished drinking, and he states that he must, in fact, refrain from handling it further. So, in other words, we're still doing it without brera, and that this identification is occurring, but how is it working? As soon as he's finished drinking, there might be a little bit of chulin left over, but that's still not going to help you. And what he's saying that, look, as soon as you've identified it, as soon as you're drinking it, it has to be put down immediately, because at that point it's muksa. And then it stops, then you can't touch it again. And so that's still how you can do it without brera, and how you have the portion being identified at that specific point. Now, the Gemara is going to finish up, and it's going to address whether we must be concerned about this kind of possibility where, you have a leftover that's going to become designated as Trumas Meiser. And what happens if, there's nothing left over, and then you would have consumed everything? Then you might have consumed tevel. So what do you do if everything has been consumed, you accidentally forgot, and you drank all of it on Shabbat? The Gemara says we learned in a Mishnah there, further to this chapter, this is going to be in Halacha 4 in Demai. It's going to say one who purchases 100 lugan of wine from among the Kuthians, whose produce is presumed to be tevel, but forgets to separate the tithes while it is still Friday, may designate the tithes during twilight on the eve of Shabbat by saying, the 2 lugan of wine that I will eventually separate after the Shabbat are hereby designated as Truma Gedola. 10 additional lugan that I will eventually separate are designated as Meiser Rishon, and the additional 9 lugan that I will eventually separate are designated as Meiser Sheni. And then he's permitted to drink this wine as long as he's careful to leave over the amounts he designated as Truma and Meiser. And the Gemara says it was taught in a Baraisa regarding this Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon prohibit this due to the concern that perhaps after he drinks some of the wineskin will split open and the remaining wine will spill before the tithes are separated. And then it will be impossible to separate the tithes after Shabbat. And the Mishnah is going to finish up and it's going to give us an answer on how do we do it. It's going to say, and this person will be found to have been drinking tevel retroactively. So if there is brera, in this case, he would have retroactively been found to have had tevel because the portion that you designated spilled out from this wineskin. And since this designation was made contingent on the separation that never took place, you have a problem. So one must wait until after the Shabbat and physically separate the tithes before drinking the wine. Now, the Gemara continues, says, now surely our Mishnah, which allows the guest to drink wine that he has served on the Shabbos based on the reliance that he will leave over Trumas Meiser afterward, does not accord with this position of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Rather, this accords with the Tana Kama. And according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, we have to be worried that the cup from which one is drinking might break or the beverage might be spilled out before he's finished drinking it. And what will that do? That will make a brera problem where retroactively he was drinking brera. So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say that brera can go the other way around too. That if you forgot to spill it out, or part of it got spilt out, and you've designated the tithes, and then that emptied out for some reason, then your tithes are gone. And retroactively, what did you have? You didn't make tithes, you have tevel. So if there is brera, you can have problems with it as well. And we have to be concerned that the beverage will spill if we do think about brera. And after he begins to drink it, and before he finishes it, because if he fails to leave over anything that he stipulated, the Meiser declaration didn't take effect. And then retroactively with brera, you consume Demai or tevel. So the Tana Kama don't hold that way. And the Gemara is going to answer it according to the Tana Kama position. It's going to say Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi said, all, including even Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Shimon, agree regarding our Mishnah's case of a mere cup of liquid that we need not be concerned for the possibility of breakage since it is consumed immediately in drinking. In other words, we're going to assume that once a person begins to drink, he's going to finish the cup. And you're not going to have time for the wineskin to split or for part of it to be spilled over. In other words, you're poured the wine, you're going to drink it all at once. And only regard to that other Mishnah case where he's going to leave some wine over and he's going to drink it over the course of an entire Shabbat, are you going to have a problem? The case of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say, well, what happens if part of it spills out? What Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi is explaining is he's saying that, look, that's where you're going to have the problem. That's the nuance, because you're drinking this wine over an entire Shabbat. And then retroactively, if there is brera, then you have a case where your tithing declaration was spilled out. And then what did you consume? You have a problem retroactively. But in the case where you're poured a cup of wine as a guest and you're finishing all of this, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi is saying that even Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai are going to say that, look, this case and that case are going to be different. And in this case, even this Mishnah's ruling is going to be unanimous because, again, we don't have this period of time where we have to be worried about everything being spilled out. So there's some nuance here with liquids on, based on the formula to not offend our guests. And, we do have to be worried about drinking tevel. All of what we covered today is going to be assuming that there is no brera. And again, it's part of a designation that you already started before Shabbat, and all you're doing is identifying the location of where it is. And yes, this is occurring on Shabbat, so there is a muksa problem, so that you have to put down the cup immediately, and you're designating the remaining portion of ties and identifying that with the liquid that's left over that you're putting down right away as soon as you're done drinking, and you can't touch it again. Have a great day.